Welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge, your front row seat to the boldest ideas and smartest strategies in the marketing game. Your host is Reed Hansen, Chief Growth Officer at MarketSurge.
Hello and welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge. Today on the show, we're unpacking one of the biggest headaches in business today, why marketing data rarely matches financial reality. And to help us make sense of it, we've got the perfect guest, Jeff Greenfield, CEO and co-founder of Probabilistic. Jeff's a three-time entrepreneur with more than 30 years of experience in marketing, analytics, and strategy. He's built companies that pioneered multi-touch attribution, viewability standards, and cookieless tracking long before the rest of the industry caught on. Now he's leading Probabilistic, an AI-driven, privacy-first attribution platform that tackles the problem every CFO and CMO is facing right now, that there is no single source of truth in marketing. Jeff is here to bridge that gap, help us understand, and show us how finance and marketing can really start speaking the same language. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Reed. Thanks for having me.
So, Jeff, you've been in marketing and analytics, marketing measurement particularly, for decades. So what drew you into this particular problem around marketing attribution?
Well, it's a problem that I faced kind of head on myself. So if I go back to the early 2000s, a client I had brought me in and asked me to kind of take over media buying for them. This was a publicly traded weight loss company. And right away, the team that I brought in identified some major issues that was going on. The biggest was this, what we call overcounting issue. And so, for every sale that they had, there was 5 or 6 different vendors or partners or publishers who were claiming credit. And that's not uncommon, but the problem that this company faced is that all of the deals that they had were on a CPA basis, so not a commission. So for every new customer, they were paying out the equivalent of 6 commissions. So that was a big problem that needed to be fixed kind of right away. So what I did at the time is I was working on some other technology products. So I had a team, took one of my engineers off of there and had them start figuring out how to solve this problem. And within a couple of weeks, we had a rudimentary solution. But as you know, what ends up happening is that once you solve one thing, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Then my team came to me and said, oh, well, what about this? What about that? So before you know it, we had built out this solution that solved many of the problems that they had. We were, able to get it down to just one, winning the sale eventually, and then also figure out, what was really working at kind of the top part of the funnel, what was driving that awareness. And I had no idea, this was like 2007, 2008, that other people had these issues. But what we had actually built out was one of the first multi-touch attribution companies. And that's kind of what got me into it. But you do bring up a good question, because as most business owners know, it's pretty fun sometimes to come up with like an ad or a campaign. It's kind of sexy, because you think you're like living in like the Mad Men type world.
Right.
But we all know when it comes down time to do the books, we all hate numbers. Numbers, even when things are good, just figuring out the books is not fun. And analytics is numbers. And it's definitely on the surface does not seem very exciting or sexy, but I've been in it now for so long and dealing with the type of customers we deal with. We deal with some of the largest companies in the US and in the world. We get to be on the inside track of what they're planning, what they're doing, and we can see what's actually working and what's not working. And it's that kind of sexy, especially when they come to us and they ask us for advice. That's really cool to have some of the best marketers in the world say, hey, what do you think about this? And what are you seeing on your side of things? So that's kind of what got me into it. And I've kind of stayed here because it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. So you brought up a point that I think is really interesting, and maybe people not immersed in data may not totally grasp, but multi-touch attribution. You've said that, Probabilistic is kind of built around the idea that marketing has no single source of truth, and then also the idea of multi-touch attribution. Could you break those concepts down for our audience that may not be totally familiar with what those mean?
Yeah, and I think the best way to do it is I'll give an example of like a product. Like let's say Reed that you're a gardener and you created this amazing news garden hose. It's incredible. It doesn't leak, and your friends love it. So you put up a Shopify page and you start running ads on Meta. So that would be Facebook and Instagram with a really cool video showing how well it works compared to others. And it has a cool name. We'll call it the Reed hose. And so
Okay.
you run ads on Google. So when someone types in the Reed hose, it'll come right up. And so what happens is someone's scrolling through their Facebook feed and they see this ad. They pause for a second, but they don't click on it. And then they just keep scrolling. And then a week later, they're on Instagram and they're scrolling along. They see the same video and now they watch it. They watch the whole thing. It's like 60 seconds long. And they're like, this Reed hose is pretty cool. When my hose, stops working and starts leaking, I'm going to get this Reed hose. But they don't do anything. They just say that to themselves. We've all done that. And then 3 weeks later, they're out gardening and they turn on the hose and the thing leaks and they're like, oh my God, should have gotten that Reed hose. And they take their phone out and they type in Reed hose into Google. They see it, they click on your ad and they buy. Now we know that it was that first ad on Facebook that caught their attention. It was that ad that they engaged with on Instagram that made them make the decision to buy. And then they bought through Google. So there's this kind of multi-step, if you will, process, part of that kind of multi-touch part that we talked about. But when you look in your Google Analytics 4 to see the source of the sale, it will tell you that the source was Google. And so multiply that. Let's say your hose takes off and you have 1,000 sales in the month. At the end of the month, you're going to see, and you're going to look at it and you're going to say, wow, my investment in Meta, Facebook, and Instagram was completely wasted. Google's driving all these sales. So I'm going to cut my spend and I'm going to put it all into Google. Now, since it took a while for the person to go from Facebook to Instagram to then search, it was like maybe a month and a half in that example that we gave, you will not see sales go down right away. It'll take a while. So let me kind of unpack all of that story that you now have in your mind. Because we talked about kind of what attribution is. Well, there's GA4 attribution, which would tell you spend all your money on Google. And if you look at Facebook, Facebook will tell you that they're driving most of the sales. But who do you believe? Do you believe Facebook or Google? Now you have two sources of truth, two different views of thing. And the problem is that Facebook doesn't have all your sales. It only has the ones that it feels like it was responsible for. Multi-touch attribution had the ability early on to be able to go in and tell you exactly what was going on, that Facebook drove those sales, so did Instagram. But in order to do that, it had to get all of this personal identifiable information via pixels and tags and things like that, which are no longer out there. Those are no longer available. It doesn't give up that information. So with Provalytics, we do it by looking at the engagement level on a daily basis, but that is not at a user level, but it's at a daily level. So we're actually able to tell you the same information we were able to do with multi-touch attribution, but we do it in a privacy safe manner. But let's just take that picture where you're advertising on Facebook, Instagram, and Google, okay? And let's expand it and let's add in Criteo, let's add in Hulu, and let's add in some other connected TV. So we've added in 3 other sources. So now you have 5 different sources of truth. And let's say you have an agency that's buying some of this stuff for you. They probably have an opinion too. So that's 6 or 7. None of these numbers match what finance has. And that's the big problem. How we solve it at Provalytics is that we bring it all together to create a single view of what's actually going on to give you this single source of truth. And that's what's missing from most marketing organizations these days.
So you've raised a lot of questions that marketers deal with. Now, is your platform, is it ingesting the data and synthesizing this, or is this more of a service human-based solution that that you're doing this as a service, for instance?
Yeah, great question, Reed. So it automatically does ingest the data if the data is available. For some of our larger clients, that data is behind firewalls, and we will deal with their, technology team in order to get it. And then the platform does automatically, if you will, take that data, ingest it, and then do all of the calculations to output the data. We do have a human layer that does a QA check still on top of all the AI that's available. We still believe in human QA. There is a layer that we provide in terms of service to help with the understanding of it. For a lot of larger organizations, this moving towards a single source of truth is a difficult task because within organizations, measurement is the whole basis for promotions, salaries, size of teams. And so bringing in new measurement is like changing your religion. And it can be a very delicate process. And so we help guide our clients through that process. For someone who is not large, this is pretty straightforward. It's like, oh my God, I finally have the right answers. I'm the decision maker. This is so simple. But for organizations that are hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands, you could understand how the numbers are tied into almost every part of the organization. So you have to be very careful, even though this data and our output is, I like to say, less wrong than what they're looking at right now. So you could say more correct, but I like to say less wrong. It still has to be, one has to move forward slowly because you could actually, cause a lot of problems if you move too quickly.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, okay, so I'd be interested in talking a little bit about how AI is involved here. Now, I know AI is a big part of your platform, and for a marketer, you just can't avoid AI. It touches everything. Now, how are you using AI to, in like this probabilistic marketing to replace kind of older methods of tracking attribution? How does that become a part of the platform?
Yeah, no, great question. And as a marketer, you shouldn't avoid AI. AI is just newer, faster machines, newer, faster computers, and it's the advancement of many years of computing power. So first off, we don't use any of the current large language models that are out there. Everything we do is in-house, so data does not actually leave our system. But to kind of understand how marketing attribution was done back in the day, there's really two components that you take in. You take in all of the click data and you take in all the impression data. Impressions are the ads that are actually shown to people. And historically, that was done at the user level, but that data is not available. So when you start to think about what is available, what's available is daily level data, how many impressions each day at a granular basis. So we take all of that data that is publicly non-PII, non-user level data. It comes into our platform, and then we go through a machine learning process, and we use AI internally. It used to be when we first built it out, it was a four-part process where after each process, a human would go in and would do a series of checks and then make a decision on what the next step is. Is it A through like T? Which one comes next? So there was all these things that humans had to be involved with. We've now evolved that to where we've trained internally AI to take care of that for us. We also use AI during our validation process. So after the models are complete, what we want to do is validate how well is this model predicting. And so what we do is we train the model just like you do how you train large language models, where you train them with things. We train it with a month's worth of the client's data, where we give it all of the marketing data. And let's say we're looking at orders, we'll give it the actual orders for those days. And then after that month, we say, okay, here's the marketing data for a new day. You have to guess what the order count is based on what you were trained with. And then we look at what is the predicted versus the actual order count for each day. And then from that, we're able to determine how valid is the model, how well is it predicting, and produce statistical scores like an R square, which tells us how well the model is predicting, and then the error range, if you will, of the model, which is called the MAPE. What's important about all models is it saying all models are wrong, some are useful, but the most important component of the model is the data. If the data is good, the model is great. And when we have great data, our models are predicting better than 92% of the time with error bands that are very, very, very small. So as long as the data is good, we can predict incredibly well for clients.
That's really great. Now, we've had some developments. You mentioned earlier with regulations in Europe and decisions by large companies like Google and Facebook to limit cookie tracking. In the next 3 to 5 years, do you see further changes versus, for data availability for this kind of tracking? Do you foresee further changes in one direction or the other? And what do you think are the best things we can do to plan for that?
Yeah, I mean, when you start to look at how things have moved in the last couple of years, and it's even before COVID, there is this move towards a more private web browsing experience. But consumers have also changed how they kind of circumvent the web, if you will. It used to be that we would go from web page to read news and things like that. And now most people spend the majority of their time within apps, if you will.
Right.
So Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Amazon's an app. And most of the shopping experiences as well are less on individual websites and more in what we call these marketplaces. So Amazon, Walmart, Target, CVS, Chewy, these are all these own kind of separate ecosystems. And, it used to be that Chewy, all they did was sell, dog food. That was it. Dog treats, cat food, that type of thing. But now they're also selling advertising. And
right.
so when you start to sell advertising, you realize that your data is valuable and you don't want it to leak out. And so that's where the term came from, what we call a walled garden. So these are gardens, if you will, where people spend time, but you can't get data out of there unless you're a large advertiser. But the problem is that I can take my own data that I own as an advertiser, and I can go to Amazon, and through what they call a clean room, we can do a data swap. And then I can target my customers in Amazon. And then I say, hey, to Amazon, hey, I want to do the same thing at Chewy. Can I bring this data over there? And they're like, oh, no, can't do that. So then I have to duplicate the same thing at Chewy. So what's happened is we've seen this proliferation of these, you could call them all mini internets, if you will. Each one is its own kind of separate environment. And that's the direction that things will continue to evolve in. We've also seen a change in terms of like consumer behavior in terms of TV viewing. A year and a half ago, the TV networks like NBC, CBS, and Fox, those were most people viewed things. For the last 8 months in a row in the US, the number one TV network, and we're talking on the big screen, not on like a mobile device, is YouTube. YouTube is the number one TV network in the US. Wow. Unbelievable. So when we start to think about changing behavior and changing habits, things are moving very, very rapidly. And also we're going to see the availability, and it's already been announced, of shopping via ChatGPT and other large language models, where you can go in and say, I'm looking for the best air purifier, and it comes up with one and, says, would you like me to make this purchase for you? Yes, I would love to. And all that entire purchase will be made within the ChatGPT window. You'll never even have to go to the website.
Wow.
So this is talk about a kind of a massive shift, if you will. So we're going to see, a lot of shifts in consumer behavior, and it's going to impact from a marketing standpoint of view. In large brands, because they're large, it takes them a long time to catch up. They're not nimble, they're not fast. This is why startups and smaller businesses have an advantage, because their decision in terms of how they do things is they just have to ask themselves, hey, does this seem like a good idea to do this? What's important to understand is that consumers right now, when it comes to purchasing products in the US, the majority of searches happen on Amazon. So if you're selling something, you need to be on Amazon. It used to be that those searches happened in Google, and then people would click on an Amazon link and go to Amazon, but now they go direct to Amazon. But now for other types of searches, we've seen that ChatGPT and some of the other AI platforms are starting to take away more and more of that search away from Google. So now there's going to be kind of a new chore, if you will, for smaller businesses, which is how do I show up inside of ChatGPT? How do I ensure that I'm there? And really what it comes down to is you have to go back to what we did before. You got to have a website. You need to make sure that your website is putting out content, that it's up to date. We're in a back to the future type mode because we need to constantly give data for these engines to take in, which is what we all had to do in the early days with Google.
Wow. Well, Jeff, lots to digest. And, I think this has been a tremendous interview, and I appreciate you sharing so much with our audience. If somebody would like to work with you or Provalytics, where are the best places that they can find you?
Well, they can always go to probabilistic.com. Best way to get there is to go to Get Prova. That's GETPROVA.com. Prova means prove. So it's like, hey, I want to get proof for what I'm doing. When you go there, there's a resources section. We've got a bunch of different downloads. There's even a free attribution certification course for folks that want to geek out and understand kind of the past, the present, and what we see as the future of marketing measurement. And you can always find me on LinkedIn as well. I tend to put a lot of content out there along the same lines of what we talked about here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. This was great.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Reed. Thanks for having me.
Want to stay ahead of what's actually working in marketing right now? Head over to MarketSurge.io and see how we're helping businesses grow smarter, faster, and louder. That's MarketSurge.io, because your next breakthrough shouldn't be a guess.